wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the world.
So I saw Obsession a little while ago, and I wasn't able to formulate a lot of my thoughts and whatever because I was kind of blinded by sheer terror. I knew very little about the movie going in. A lot of it was I just knew that it was about a wish structure. I knew it was about like sort of dating and like one-sided like relationships, and like you saw the marketing, and like this was before any of the clips were out, and it was pretty much a week or two after the initial release. While I was super interested in seeing it, I was more interested in backrooms, but they were always in the same sentence. I believe that Obsession is a commentary on how the patriarchy views women, as well as modern relationships, and how they've been obscured by attention spans and the internet. In the film, we follow Bear, played by Michael Johnston, a 20-something-year-old who has a crush on his best friend Nikki, played by Indy Neveretti. In the first scene, Bear comes home to his cat dead after it got into one of his pill bottles of oxycodone, which, why does he have oxys? After he cleans up the mess, he gets a call from Nikki, and while on the phone, she loses her necklace, and this prompts Bear to go and get a new necklace for her. At a crystal tchotchke type shop, he totally forgets about the necklace and gets something for himself. He buys himself a one-wish willow, a vintage-looking toy that will grant one wish, as it says. That night, Bear and Nikki, as well as their friends Ian and Sarah, get drinks and play trivia. Afterwards, Nikki says she gets tired pretty early, and Bear is the only one who wants to drive her home. Pulling up to her house, Bear fails to even attempt to ask Nikki out. He hesitates at the last minute, and Nikki walks back to her house. Bear then pulls out the one-wish willow and wishes that Nikki would love him more than anyone else in the entire world. Couldn't go wrong. Immediately, Nikki snaps into this sort of trance where she kind of forgets everything that just happened, and she behaves like an entirely different person. For clarity, real Nikki is still there. There is a difference between Wish Nikki and Real Nikki. Real Nikki still feels all of her senses, but she has no control over her body. I'll be referring to this persona that has taken over her as Wish Nikki. Wish Nikki immediately pushes them to continue to hang out. She recommends first he stays at her house, and then she's like, oh, I'll just stay at your house. Here she flat out uses manipulative language to get what she wants. She kind of pushes Bear into agreeing into this, and he's not really sure whether the wish worked or not. The rest of the film depicts how this relationship escalates, with Wish Nikki causing some deeply awful, intensely cringe social situations, as well as racking up a few dead bodies. Wish Nikki frequently switches back into Real Nikki, and she is surprised, confused, angry, before Wish Nikki just yanks back control. The way Indy Neveretti acted both personas of Nikki reminded me a lot of Lakeith Stanfield's character in Get Out. Basically, when the camera flashes, he goes back to the character that was being taken over. This connection to Get Out made me visualize Nikki's situation, Real Nikki's situation, as sort of in that sunken place where she's just kind of watching her life go on like a movie. While Bear is definitely evil for continuing the situation, he was really only given two ways out: kill Nikki or suicide. Either way, the fantasy must end, but he doesn't have the need to end it because he is still getting some sort of enjoyment from it. One night, Real Nikki sleep talks, and this is Real Nikki trying to communicate to Bear. She asks Bear to kill her. Bear then replies with, "What's so bad about being with me?" Now aware of Real Nikki's consciousness, Bear still continues to try and make this whole situation work, and this relationship work with Wish Nikki, without her being a homicidal social embarrassment. Ironically, I've heard a queer friend many times say that men don't want a wife. Pardon my French, they want a dog that can fuck. An obedient companion that will always listen to them and follow their orders, etc., etc. The ways in which Wish Nikki behaves is much closer to a pet than a human. She doesn't want to be separated from him. She asks to join Bear in the bathroom. She makes offerings with dead animals and refuses to move from the door when Bear leaves the house. We see her freeze in a painful looking smile before the camera pans down to her legs as she pisses herself. Hours later, Bear returns to Nikki standing in her own excrement and vomit, echoing the image of his dead cat from the opening. In the same way a pet owner would buy a new pet after the other one died, Bear lost his pet cat and got a new one, and neglected it the same. His cat died from negligence. It's virtually impossible for a cat to open a closed prescription bottle, especially in his medicine cabinet. That would be a lot to ask a cat to do. The only way that the cat could have gotten into it is if Bear left it out and open, so it kinda is his fault. Judging by his character, his negligence seems to stem from selfishness, or at least possible anxiety that masks unconscious selfishness. Nikki became the neglected pet in the same way anyone who dates Bear probably would become one, despite the whole wish demon possession thing. At first I stopped writing this article because I felt like I wasn't touching on anything I necessarily needed to comment on, being queer and all. However, I think the film doesn't just touch on heterosexual relationships, but on relationships as a whole in modern society. Phones and dating apps have changed the way we interact with romantic attraction and how we see a significant other. Framing the snap of the One Wish Willow as matching on an app like Tinder, after that connection is made, Wish Nikki's anxiously attached to Bear. Her feelings are directly tied to Bear. When Bear is uncomfortable, she's uncomfortable. This anxious behavior, while stemming from emotional immaturity, in reality has to do with how Bear sees their relationship. At the start, he didn't know that the wish would come true, let alone lead to his death. Take, for instance, the montage of them as a happy couple. While the relationship works for Bear in the short term, after a while, he grows less and less interested in Nikki. Bear hasn't exactly become bored with her, but he doesn't really find her stimulating anymore. Here's the problem with modern romance. Infinite scrolls and dating app carousels provide the brain with easy access to a new and stimulating experience. In a brief article for National Geographic titled, "This is Your Brain on Dating Apps," author Lee Worthington speaks on the addictive nature of dating apps, quoting anthropologist Helen Fisher, saying, "The brain is ready to get addicted, particularly when it comes to love. This makes the act of scrolling through potential mates that more tantalizing, given the guarantee of love that the apps advertise." In the article, "Internet Dating Addiction, a Match Made in Heaven," for the psychology magazine In Mind, psychologists make connections between the act of scrolling and addiction. Similarly to scrolling an app like TikTok, where you're scrolling to find a newer, more stimulating dopamine spike, Tinder and other dating apps take that same logic, reflecting the ups and downs of gambling. Bear, though not specifically shown on dating apps, is affected by overabundant sources for pleasure. He lightly stalks Nikki on Instagram before the wish is made. In the same way social media shortens attention spans, dating apps stunt how long one's attraction lasts because people will always have the possibility of a quick rebound after a failed relationship or after a relationship that isn't stimulating anymore. This is the underlying reason why modern audiences are so frightened by the film. They engage in this behavior. When confronted with a relationship Bear is tired of, he has absolutely no way out. Not even ghosting can save him now. But isn't this what he wanted? Throughout the entire movie, Bear tries to police Wish Nikki's behavior. He constantly tries to tell her how to act, but does so without conviction, often her reaction making him recede back into an apologist stance, such as in a dinner scene. Bear is a wet blanket. He's anxious and socially awkward. Bear never believes he's doing any harm to Nikki until her behavior becomes irrational and uncanny. The film critiques the ideas of how women should be acting in patriarchal heterosexual relationships. Wish Nikki's subservience, mixed with her dismissal of her own physical pain, reflects how women aren't seen as humans separate from their husband. Separated from the context of the story, wishing someone would love you is a common thing. I mean, everyone has had a crush. Everyone has thought, oh, I wish that this person would love me back. It's, it's a common thing. However, part of the morally questionable position that Bear takes, though, is that of entitlement and how it relates to his enjoyment. Let's take a look at Bear as a character. He wants to be with Nikki, but she just sees him like a brother. By basically forcing Nikki to love him via the One Wish Willow, Bear crosses beyond Freud's conception of the pleasure principle. Defined as the function that directs mental activity towards obtaining pleasure, the pleasure principle acts as a mental limit of excitation, preventing the psyche from being overwhelmed. Bear's relationship with Nikki not only approaches this limit, but far exceeds it. This encroachment is described by Lacan in his term jouissance, roughly translated as enjoyment in English, defined as an excessive amount of pleasure that becomes painful or overwhelming. In Seminar 12, Lacan describes jouissance as tied to ethical questions of good and evil as it relates to transgression. Similar to a rebellious teenager, when the limit is set, say, go to bed at 10 o'clock, jouissance describes the perverse pleasure in crossing that boundary, effectively staying past bedtime and relishing in your bad behavior. Bear's wish coming true, plus his complacency and pleasure in the situation, is an example of this transgression. Nikki expresses she doesn't see Bear as romantically desirable, literally saying that she sees him as a brother. And Bear must be thinking along the lines of, if it only were possible that she would love me back. The transgression of imposing his own desire onto Nikki directly leads to his own pain and eventual demise. This concept of imposing your enjoyment onto another, tied to toxic masculine behavior, is uniquely Trumpian. Nothing screams enjoying transgressive behavior quite like Nick Fuentes' quote, "Your body, my choice." Jouissance seems to be the goal for Trumpian figures. Take, for instance, Trump's pardons of businessmen engaged in white-collar crime. The dismissal of Trump's sex crimes as well as his supporters' crimes seems like a normal or recurring story. Donald Trump's involvement, as well as the many billionaires and CEOs that continued to work with Jeffrey Epstein after he was convicted of sex trafficking minors, engage in this perverted over-enjoyment of the act of transgressing what normal people view as the law. Why this film is so popular right now is because of how it goes about tackling a critique of modern dating and the patriarchal possession of women. While Bear tries to uphold his nice guy persona, he falls into a perspective of, I had no other choice, claiming he's, still the nice guy and he was kind of forced into all of this by Wish Nikki. This is precisely the issue with current politicians' liberalism. It's being too nice and allowing horrible things to happen under the guise of greater societal enjoyment and progress. In this sense, the One Wish Willow represents power and wealth. Bear comes to represent liberalism's falsely or purposefully oblivious naivete. And Nikki is yet another victim taken advantage of by greater powers out of her control.
Does your dad really have cancer?
No.